Guys, I'm sorry, I don't know what just happened there. My video just suddenly cut out. Must be this retrograde season. If it happens again, I'll just accept it for what it is and I'll try doing this another day. So sorry about that. I don't know what was happening there. Anyways, let me recap for people who watch this video and hopefully it works this time. Basically today we're talking about the avoidant fear of commitment, what it means, unpacking it, explaining it. Let me try round two, and like I said, if this turns into a technological kerfuffle, I'll just be like, fuck it, I'll save it for another time. Anyways, let's try again. So basically what I was saying was avoidant fear of commitment is different from what we traditionally think of a fear of commitment. Fear of commitment might mean like, oh, you're scared of actually being in a committed relationship, or you're scared of like making a solid decision about something, right? That's not how avoidant fear of commitment works in an intimate relationship. If you're eliciting you with the avoidant partner are getting them to a stage where they're fearing growing commitment, consider that actually a wonderful sign about both of you for the fact that you're someone who is able to elicit such strong feelings from your partner. It's a gift. It means that you're able to really forge a bond with this person, and it is real. And the fact that it's so real frightens these individuals. So let's go back into this again too. I can see someone here has said, glad to see you making content. I hope you're feeling better. I am. My energy levels are through the roof now that I've worked on a lot of stuff behind the scenes. So that's why I'm being a bit more active. So let me go back to what I was trying to explain before Instagram decided to end things abruptly, just like an avoidant attacher in a relationship. Basically, what happens is that when the avoidant attacher is building a solid foundation with a partner that they really like, the challenge is that for a lot of them, they end up getting a flood of fear and anxiety around where this is potentially going. Feeling like they're not going to be able to meet your needs, not be able to, be able to support you, be able to live up to your expectations of them. And because they don't disclose any of these fears to their partner, they often sabotage the relationship in two distinct ways. We know that they abruptly end things, or they may drag things out where they end up doing a bunch of deactivating strategies like cheating on their partner, doing a lot of drinking, also numbing themselves through a variety of things like workaholism. But I just see someone here has been like, can I speak a bit slower? Yes, I will. The point is that for a lot of these individuals, when they do have that fear of intimacy and commitment, this is when they start becoming incredibly flighty in their situationships and relationships. Now, with that in mind, this is where things get very confusing for people in these dynamics. People often then think, oh, well, they've said to me at the end of this experience that they don't want to be in a relationship anymore. They can't see themselves being in a relationship. This is the avoidant attacher speaking. And then, of course, a lot of us know that the avoidant attacher, a few days, weeks, or even months, will bounce into a new relationship where they're seemingly able to commit with this person and maybe do all the things that you were planning on doing with them. This is really hurtful, baffling, and it can also cause a lot of people to understandably feel like, well, hang on, it seems like they said they couldn't do commitment with me. How is it that they can do commitment with these other people? I just want to take a moment here to say that if you look at this logically, it's not going to make any sense. Most people here are not avoidantly attached and don't have an active fear of commitment and intimacy. If anything, I actually want to say this isn't really a fear of commitment. Maybe you throw that word out. What this is a fear of is vulnerability and also being emotionally close to someone. Because the reality is avoidant attachers can do commitment, but the distinguishing characteristic of those kinds of relationships is that if they're committing to a partner, the challenge is that often in those dynamics, especially after a breakup with someone where it felt like it was amazing and everything was going on track, usually what happens is the avoidant attacher has not dealt with their feelings for you. They will usually take all of those big feelings and put it into the next person, and that new couple basically has the intensity of your relationship or situationship. Then what will happen is that it'll look like on the outside that it's a case of deja vu. You, who had gone through the breakup, may look at this couple now doing all the things that you were planning to do, going on the holidays, doing all the romantic things, having all of these intense experiences and, things that you were planning on doing or were doing frequently. And it's often because for the avoidant attacher, many things are often playing out in this particular way. They've taken the euphoria of the honeymoon period plus their feelings for you and dumped it into this relationship. 2, they're often trying to convince themselves and the world at large they don't have a problem. Leading up to the end of these relationships, usually, as in with you, usually they might say things like, I think I might have ADHD, or I don't think my head's right and I need to go and check myself out. They might claim that they even have avoidant personality disorder, which is not really the root issue. An avoidant personality disorder has nothing to do with this. So the key thing here is that often they recognize that they might have a problem. However, and this is a video for another day, the avoidant ego is a very particular thing, which is they have to maintain the fact much of the time that they are a good person. They don't cope with shame very well. They often need to impression manage their lives in order to make themselves feel better about themselves. So as a consequence, this is where they may enter into a new relationship wanting to make it look like they don't have a problem. They don't need therapy. They can seemingly commit to this new person. The only reason it wouldn't work out is if the person they get with is such an individual where they get increasingly vulnerable and intimate with that person like they did with you. If it is going the distance, there could be a few reasons for this. One of them could be that everything's just joy, sunshine, rainbows, and flowers at this particular point in time, and that there's nothing necessarily triggering for this avoidant attacher yet. It could be a very superficial, childlike relationship, which isn't to say that that's a bad thing. It's just to say that there's nothing that's really causing them to feel that intense vulnerability and intimacy just yet. 2, they could be with someone who is emotionally unavailable like them. They could also, 3, be with someone who is also incredibly chaotic in a relationship with them. And remember, many of these individuals have come from very chaotic household and environments. Being around emotionally unavailable people is not the space for vulnerability. I think we get it twisted. We think that if we're committing to someone, it's because we genuinely love them. How many couples, marriages, relationships are built on a foundation of euphoria and childlike fantasy, but actually aren't built on much depth and emotional intimacy? So please just remember that though it may seem like these individuals have cultivated a seemingly amazing new experience with the next person, just remember that social media is not an accurate lens into the behind the scenes of what is actually going on in this dynamic. We don't know what's triggering this person. And also, we don't know if this avoidant attacher is also deactivating on their new partner as well too. Much of the time, the new partner will go through the exact same experience with what you went through as well too. Unless, of course, there is an experience where, for instance, you are behaving, they're behaving very differently to how you behaved as well too. Please understand that this is very baffling stuff. It is very confusing. Most people here wouldn't try and, let's just say as an example, you abruptly end your relationship with the person that you're seeing. Most people, I don't think, who are listening to this would probably, from a place of shame, feel like, I don't feel like I'm a good person, so what I need to do in order to overcome this shame is to be with other people to help me feel better about myself and to make me not feel like such a bad person. So please understand that most people off the back of these experiences are usually in intense grief. Can I also say too, for the avoidant attachers who have this experience with other avoidants, know exactly what I'm talking about. They too also go through this experience. And everybody, regardless of your attachment style, often does try to date again post-breakup like this. And people know that if you try getting into a new relationship or even just date someone temporarily, the high of the honeymoon phase does not eradicate the feelings of grief and also pain off the back of the previous relationship. Your new partner may teach you that you can love again, but they will never be able to take away that carcass of the previous relationship that you had. They're not your undertaker. They're not your therapist. At times, your new relationship might be a temporary band-aid to a wound that you seriously need a lot of treatment for. So all I'm saying is that please be mindful of the complexities of the emotional experience and also what's playing out on paper, because these things need a lot of context to better understand. It's also important to understand too that even though some of these individuals might have said things to you like, oh, well, I just don't want commitment with you. I don't want to do this with you right now. And then they get married with the next person. Again, it doesn't mean that you look at this and go, oh, well, they're not avoidantly attached. They are 100% avoidantly attached. If someone is having such a sharp change of mind around that, and they also aren't discerning and saying, things like, listen, I like you, but I don't want a relationship with you. And then they seemingly get with the next person and you can't even get solid feedback from them. I think it says more about them than it does about you. Please bear in mind that a lot of these people, when you ask them for feedback about why they seemingly didn't want to commit to you, may struggle to come up with constructive feedback as to why this wasn't working. I go back to this infamous example all the time. The avoidant attachers who say things like, well, you like mountain hiking, but I don't like mountain hiking. I know I flog that example to death, but I tell you what, it's such a great one because it really illustrates the point that these are really, really baffling rationalizations that they will provide you sometimes. And similar to what I was talking about today, when avoidant attachers are making decisions from a very emotional place, they may not make decisions that are necessarily in their best interest. I had actually a follower who identified with a dismissive avoidant attachment, and they asked me, what can we do to better understand if we're doing this, and what can we do to better help ourselves so that way we're not necessarily aborting a good thing. And the reality is, and I've seen this with a lot of authors who are avoidantly attached where they talk about their experiences, you're probably going to shut down. Your anxieties are probably going to flare up. But one of the best things you can do is have an accountability team of people who are actually grounded, know you, and trust you. It is very easy for avoidant attachers to try and seek out confirmation bias from a third party to justify their exit. They may sing things like, that person was taking control and freedom away from me. That person was abusive whenever they cried to me, when in fact you, the partner they were dating, are neither abusive nor controlling. You may get a bad rap because they're freaking out and their brain is creating all these stories about what's going on, which is not happening in reality. Avoidant attacher brains are highly well adapted. They are very well constructed to protect them from feeling vulnerable with people. Vulnerability feels like death to avoidant attachers. They do not like that feeling at all, amidst other things too. They've had bad experiences also with shame and rejection. They may not want to feel that ever again. So their brains are very well guarded to help them avoid such adverse emotions in the future with new relationships that might come up. As such, please bear in mind that in these particular cases, when their emotional brain activates, their logic goes down exponentially. And this is when we get into an entirely confusing experience, which my clients almost unanimously say is a head fuck. Because 1 minute they're in love with you, the next, seemingly they aren't. So please bear in mind, once again, these dynamics are confusing, painful, tragic, loving, best experiences you might feel like you'll ever have romantically, can feel like you've been with a twin flame or a soulmate. And I'm not here to invalidate anyone who feels otherwise, because frankly, I know what that feels like. But the thing that I'm just trying to say is that you do not know what that person is often going through emotionally, because just remember, if they're emotionally unavailable, they may not have the skill set to actually articulate and express all these complicated dynamics that are going through. Worse, they may be justifying their behavior and saying, this is normal. Usually the avoidant attachers who know something's up is when they've gone through this multiple times and they're like, this is not feeling right. I know that I love this person, or I know that I've loved many people and I just seemingly keep looking for the right person. There's got to be something more to this, and it may actually be time to point the finger at the common denominator. So that's why I just want to, once again, break this down and say, please understand, this is complicated. I don't expect everyone to understand it. That's totally fine. But if you are looking for a better understanding of commitment phobia, particularly in avoidant attachers, I highly recommend checking the books Men Who Can't Love and He's Scared, She's Scared by Stephen Carter, because those two books do a fabulous job of helping people to better understand the complexities of this, why avoidant attachers do this, and help you take away so much of the personalizing out of this. Because if you get to a point where you keep thinking, well, they seemingly can do commitment, so it must be me, you might actually be missing some crucial information. And maybe, with all due respect, you might be beating yourself up way too much, claiming too much responsibility for something that was never yours in the first place. So, with that out of the way, I'm surprised that I actually managed to get that explanation all sorted out as quickly as I did. I have about 20 minutes left before I need to bounce. So during this time, if you have any questions for me, feel free to put your questions in the question mark box, and I'll do my best to get through them as quickly as I can due to the nature of time, and we can take care of it from here. If I have time, I'll also go through some of the comments in the chat as well too. Also, just want to say thank you, by the way, to everyone who's joined today too. Love the loyal people who've been following for a while too. I really appreciate the contribution and support. Thank you very much also. Oh, I can see someone here said I could write a novel about this entire awful experience. Can I just say that I jokingly said that to one of my clients yesterday who had a pretty bad experience with this. It's when you're in this field, right, and you're working with these cases, you hear a lot of gnarly stories. But I almost find that I'm not surprised. Sorry, I continue to be surprised by just how awful some of these cases can actually get. Maybe one day I'll find a way to confidentially talk about some of these stories without referring to client names, just to sort of talk about how, frankly, fucked some of these situations can actually get for people and how emotionally devastating they are. Because I've had a few clients actually, end themselves as a consequence of this, because it is, I haven't had clients specifically, but I do know people who are end of life as a consequence of this. And I have heard stories of people who have committed suicide off the back of these. So, it's a pretty intense experience to go through, and no one deserves to go through this experience. Hell, the avoidant attachers don't deserve to go through being on the receiving end of this as well too. Nobody does. It's pretty horrific. Anyways, let's dive into the questions. All right. If avoidants take around 5 years in therapy, how long do anxious preoccupied take on average? Yeah, about the same. I've been in therapy on and off for the last 5 years, done a lot of inner work on myself. It is still an ongoing journey. Hell, without being too woo, this retrograde period just coincidentally happens to have been one of the hardest periods I've had of learning my own shit and working through my stuff. And it is just one of those things where, it is an ongoing journey of learning and committing to yourself. But the plus side is you do get a lot better. Heidi Priebe is a great example of a creator on YouTube who talks a lot about her journey out of fearful avoidant attachment. And there are other creators too. For instance, For Love We Heal. He's done similarly as well too. It takes a while. Some people may be unicorns and they able to work through it a bit quicker than that. But there's no 3 months to recovery for any of us, I think. How to tell if you're avoidantly attached or have avoidant personality disorder? Ooh. Okay, I've got to be honest. I don't know much about avoidant personality disorder, but from what I've gathered from online, if I'm being extremely reductive, is that avoidant personality disorder is like being an extreme hermit, like being extremely introverted, incredibly sensitive to criticism, and also has humongous fears of, rejection as well too. And that is not someone who's necessarily got an avoidant attachment style. It's important to understand that probably needs to be assessed with a clinician, but in most cases, that's a very specific criteria, not someone who usually has an intimacy problem. They might. That just might be something that they have along the side, but it's not the same. This is really random, but do you think you could... This is such a great question. This is really random, but do you think you can manifest back an avoidant? Okay. I don't know if anyone saw the joke video that I did last Thursday where I talked about this. Oh boy. Okay. How do I answer this without being sarcastic about it? Okay. Short answer is, I guess you could. I guess you could manifest your ex back. So if I, oh Jesus. All right. Let's entertain this for a bit of entertainment. All right, let's just say you want to manifest your avoidant ex back. All right, let's say you want to do this. And look, I'm not going to shame anyone who wants to, because I know a lot of people do. So I get it. It's a phase. Here's what I'm going to say. And please bear in mind that what I'm about to say is not something that I would ethically tell a client ever to do. This is purely for the purposes of edutainment. With that disclaimer out there, you can do with this whatever you like. Okay, let's go for it. Okay, so this is sort of an exhausting question to answer, but let's have fun with it. All right, can you manifest your avoidant ex back? What I would recommend if you truly want to manifest an avoidant ex back, like let's just be realistic about it, you'd have to become actually detached to this person. Move on with your life, find joy again in the things that you have outside of this last relationship you were in. Really start to rebuild yourself and your self-esteem and self-confidence where you don't necessarily feel like you need that person in your life again. In my experience, I've often found that the path of detachment and becoming more indifferent to this experience, funnily enough, usually has these people circling back in their own time, because energetically by pulling away from them, they usually in their own psychic way often feel that loss and abandonment and may come back around to you. Keyword, may. By that point, however, when you're at a more emotionally grounded place, you're also in a place where you can make better decisions about whether you even want to entertain this relationship again. So all I'm going to say here at this particular point in time is that usually when you have become so emotionally indifferent to this experience is when you might get to a point where you're like, do I even want to entertain this again? So with that in mind, I would say if you have gotten to that point, I'd be then asking some very hard questions of your partner, like, have you been to therapy? Why now? Do you want to get back to me? So with that being said, please bear in mind that detachment should ultimately be done for your self-care and healing first. And if they come back around, it's a bonus. I guess you have manifested at that point. So yeah, I'm not here to shame anyone who wants to manifest their ex back. You're welcome to do it. But I'm going to give one final sobering word of warning to this. I have yet to hear of a successful case where the avoidant partner came back and it successfully ended happily ever after. Usually it hasn't, most of the time, because that person often hasn't done the work or had an accountability team to actually work through their stuff and actually work through it. So that's what I'll say on that. Great question though. Even though, look, by the way, even though sometimes it's just a frustrating question because I see a lot of manipulation online and people using the no contact rule to try and get their ex back, there is, look, I get the feeling of wanting them to come back, so I get it. Which treatment do you recommend to heal attachment trauma? My favorite's internal family systems therapy. I've learned a little bit of it as a beginner, but I'm actually looking at investing in a course for this. I know that my therapist teaches me how to do that as well too. Well, not teaches. We do internal family systems as part of my treatment. But I would say that if you are going to work on trauma, probably easy does it. Like, I really like the work I do with my clients and giving them a lot of psychoeducation, helping them take charge of themselves. And then if they need more of that sophisticated trauma work, they can seek out a specialist. I mean, my team does that too. Like, my team does root cause therapy, which is all trauma focused. So in that sense, I would say as long as it's trauma informed, I'd really help you out with that. Let's see, what have we got here? Why do you think avoidants don't speak to us for like a month and then randomly text to say they hope we're doing well or that they love us or miss us but do nothing to initiate something? Great question. I think there's a combination of things. I think in the month that they're away, they're often grappling with intense emotions that they're not equipped to deal with, like shame, guilt, depression. And then I think they might, and it might be a bit of a grapple for them where on one hand they're like, I want to reach out. On another part of them, they're like, no, you can't reach out because they'll never want to speak to me again. They're going to reject me if they speak to me again. So there's a lot of fear. And I think if they do reach out, there is that, I think, hope of being able to maybe get an apology from you, being able to reconnect with you because they miss you. And I think fear of potentially being rejected and fear of potentially being hurt, by you because of what happened. So I think they're very sensitive in those moments and they don't often have the skill set to work through those intense feelings. How to take the avoidant rejection as something not good enough in me? Looks, body, personality. Great question. I'm going to do a video on this tomorrow, eloquently saying, if you got an avoidant attacher who broke up with you abruptly, consider that actually one of the greatest things about you, which is you've been able to elicit a connection with this person. The reality is that someone doesn't just abruptly end a relationship quite like that. For someone to abruptly end things in that particular way, there's got to be, again, with the context that I talk about, for you to be able to do that says a lot of great things about you. So that's where it's really good. I can see, I've just noticed someone here has mentioned in relation to the question that I asked before, that I was answering before, about why do avoidant attachers, say things like, oh, I miss you after a while, and maybe not be able to facilitate more. This person said, it's easy to love someone at distance for the last question, and I would absolutely agree with that. I think avoidant attachers can be masters at having long distance relationships with people because, again, you're not close, you're not vulnerable. But one thing that can happen even in long distance pairings is that if the conversation starts to become more intimate, that can trigger them again and they back away again too. Please remember that when we say fear of intimacy and commitment, we've got to include that intimacy component as well too. It's got to be how that relates to being vulnerable in a context as well. I can see someone here said, not all avoidants abruptly leave, some drag it out, then go cold and detach. I'd love more content on this. That's definitely more of a dismissive avoidant experience, and I've actually done content on that a few times. In fact, there was a live that I did with Tawny Loveless last year where she talked about her experience going through that exact thing. So absolutely, that's the other variation of how this goes. And I mentioned that actually at the beginning of this live, or the one that I attempted to record before Retrograde had something to say about it. Please make a video about when we have to leave avoidance. Everyone just talks about them leaving. Yes, I could do a video on that. And I can see this is the same person who made that point about how usually I talk about the abrupt leaving and how it's usually a case of them, not always doing that. Yes, I'm very happy to do a video about when it comes down to a case of you have to leave and you don't want to, but you know that you have to for your own health and well-being. Let's see, what else have we got here too? Do avoidant attachers come back if they abruptly withdraw in it? Do anxious avoidants, so fearful avoidants, come back if they abruptly withdraw in a deactivation moment? Yeah, they often can. Many fearful avoidants are notorious for boomeranging back and forth very quickly at times, so it can happen. Is it fair to say the vast majority of avoidants are dishonest with themselves and therefore dishonest with their partners? My simplistic answer is yes, because a lot of them are very good at people pleasing and also not wanting to, look like a bad person or feel judged and shamed. So as a consequence, they can often mold themselves to different personal situations in order to elicit a better reaction from people. And also at times, I think they are very ashamed of some of their own parts of themselves too. So yes, that can be consistent. Someone here's said, I'm happy you're feeling better. Thank you very much. How does the avoidant decide what are your needs and decide they can't meet them without even asking you? I feel they're good at making your emotional mapping, but awful at interpreting you. That's anxiety. So I find that a lot of avoidant attachers, that in their anxiety, they often have this fear that they're not going to be able to meet your needs, but they often make that decision without involving you. They don't even ask you usually what your emotional needs are, but often they have this belief that, as intimacy is getting closer, that somehow they're not going to be able to fulfill it. So much of the time, I've actually heard a variation of this where one person said to me once, oh, I think I'm just too boring for people. It's like, how do you know? How do you know that you're too boring for your partners? Maybe that's a fear about your own self and also how you feel about you, but people may genuinely find you quite interesting. So this is a key thing to say, that the perceptions we have about ourselves and also how we feel about ourselves can be projected onto other people. And we may unfortunately have a lot of anxiety that's telling us inaccurate information over other things that are going on. Let's see. This is really, oh no, I read that one. That was a good one. Avoidant X and I have mutual friends. He doesn't show up if I go out with them. Why does he avoid me? It could be because he's also still feeling very vulnerable off the back of the relationship, and he's also comes up with a lot of feelings of shame and guilt. So that could be a reason. Why would an avoidant keep up with an ex-situationship while in an apparently committed relationship for years? Keep up with the ex and be in the new thing for years. Oh, I can tell you why. I've had clients who go through this all the time. So it goes back to what that user before was saying, which is distance. If you are an ex where you're in a situationship with an avoidant and they're still interacting with you when they're in a new relationship, this means the new relationship is sort of like a buffer and they get access to you without the closeness to you, right? And if they end up getting too close to their new partner, they can always go back to you. This is not a conscious strategy. This is done in a way where there's a few things going on. One, they're ambivalent about you, the situationship, and they don't know what to do with you, whether they should keep you or they should, let you go. And they often have a lot of guilt and shame about, what that role is for you. And so it can be a bit of a childish experience in that they don't know how to actually just let you be and commit to this new relationship. Remember, these people have a lot of issues around committing to one thing properly as well too. Secondly, this could be a case too where they actually really still want that vulnerability and connection. Sorry, not vulnerability part. They still want the connection between you, but they don't want the closeness between you as well too. So that's another thing as well. But often it's done with a purpose, a subconscious purpose that's not designed to intentionally be manipulative. It's not designed to necessarily hurt people. It's designed in order to help them feel like they can have their cake and eat it too. But they often do it in such a way where it is very, very damaging to you, the ex, and to their new partner, because they're not committing to either of you. It's like choosing between two cars. You still got the old one whilst also test driving the new one. Make a choice. Is I was over it anyways a common rationalization after avoidant gets left? As in, oh yes, this can be. I think I know what you're referring to. So let's imagine you're dating someone who likely has more of a dismissive avoidant attachment style and you leave and they say things, yeah, I was over it anyways. That's a rationalization that's probably coming from a place of disassociation and also for them shutting down a lot of their feelings for you because they may be anxious about the future, have shame about their role in this as well too. They'll say things like, yeah, if we were to break up today, I wouldn't be too fussed. And it really is a thing where it's very much a case of them not wanting to actually, what they're saying in the moment is indicative of how they're feeling in the moment. But what they may not realize is that they're actually in a state of deactivation and they're shutting down. And so as a consequence, they're not really feeling their true feelings for you. They're trying to suppress a lot of the adverse emotions that they're going through at that particular moment. So yes, that is unfortunately something that they can say. Let's see, what else we got here? How will a fearful avoidant and dismissive avoidant dynamic work? To be completely honest, it's rough for both of them because depending on the willingness and capability of both people to work through that, it's like the anxious avoidant dynamic on steroids. The fearful avoidant tends to be very easily triggered by fears of abandonment, and the dismissive avoidant might feel like they're just constantly needing to pull away. And then eventually the coldness of one of those people will eventually trigger either one of them to abruptly end things very quickly. So in that sense, it is very much a case where it can be very sudden in those particular experiences. I can see someone here says, is he avoidant or just not interested? If they're not interested, they never felt anything for you in the first place. If they're avoidant, they've likely ended things abruptly after everything was hunky-dory. That's my very simplistic answer for that. How to differentiate between a true, honest, and securely attached person or someone who is faking their feelings? Everything felt perfect with my avoidant ex until the end. Ugh. That's a hard question to answer because I'd need discernment on that to determine what was going on in the context of your experience and also something else. But usually I'd say when you're with a securely attached person, typically, even though they might say the things like, I'm looking for a relationship, I'm expressive of my feelings, it's something that's going to maintain itself over the course of the relationship that you've had. Please bear in mind that it is when you're in a relationship with a more secure person or even an avoidant attacher who's doing the work on themselves, there is a huge mark of accountability, responsibility, and willingness to grow and change, and someone who's not just allowing their deactivation strategies to get the better of them. It's someone who wants to actually work towards the relationship and isn't pulling away just out of anxiety. Also, typically when you're in a relationship with someone who is more avoidantly attached, even if they're saying all the right things, something inside of you will feel like, I feel like we can't have conflict. I feel like we can't have vulnerable conversations. It almost feels like everything is a little bit too good to be true in that it feels somewhat superficial and fun and joyful, but it doesn't feel like you can actually address some big things that are coming up every now and then too. Or if you can, you're met with a lot of vacillation and a lot of, just apologies without actually a lot of action taken to work on the relationship as well in a meaningful way. It sort of leads you to a point where you feel like, there are certain things that aren't working as you might like. So that's what I would describe there. Intuitively, you will feel something inside of you where you're like, something feels a little off with this, where it feels like this is all fun and games, but there's something here that's just not really, I'm not as connected. This person feels a little bit disconnected and I don't feel like I'm really bonding at that deeper level that I really need to. And it can feel almost a bit like you're stepping on eggshells. Like if you were to say something to them that might be quite let's just say, crucial to the relationship's health, but also you know it might be triggering, you might be skirting around the issue out of fear that if you bring it up, it might cause them to break up. I can see someone here has written, I'm really confused. If he ever loved me because we literally hit the 6-month mark and he slowly detached and stopped himself twice from leaving, but the third time left for good. Yeah, he loved you. Like, my best assumption is that's likely an avoidant case. Like, I mean, you know, the fact that you're feeling confused, the fact that he kept coming back and forth like that, and also the fact that, you know, he stopped himself twice makes me just sort of think, this man does not sound like he was clear about how he was feeling in that situation at all, which means to me there was probably those big fears coming up for him, you know, with regards to commitment, and also probably a lot of, you know, love there as well too. Who knows? But that's my assumption. I could be wrong. There are people who get into relationships but they don't feel anything for their partner as well too, and that could be because they've come from very traumatic backgrounds as well. But usually in those cases, they don't have that extreme case of confusion and back and forth wishy-washiness that happens in these cases. Last question for today. Why can't they say I love you back or say it often? So normally we find that dismissive avoidants in particular are not very good at expressing their feelings towards people, and they often feel like if I do that, then I'm giving that person some control over me. Fearful avoidants are especially notorious with this, in that they don't like the idea of giving something from themselves unto others, because they feel like, well, if I give good sex, if I give my feelings, if I give X, Y, Z, this person will use that against me and make me feel like I'm controlled. So it can relate to how they don't like to give up something of themselves over to someone else. All right, guys, I've got to wrap it up because I've got to go. It's been a pleasure as always. Yes, this live will be up. I don't know why the previous one I tried doing didn't upload, but again, retrograde. Hope everyone's doing well. I understand again that this is a very confusing topic around fear of commitment, but if you can get your head around it, if you can understand the components of it and the complexities of it, I think it'll help you feel a lot better about your situation. If you need help with this particular case and you want to work through it with one of my team members, because I'm still fully booked forever, you're very welcome to reach out to one of my team members. Amy and Kate are phenomenal at working through this, so I highly recommend you check them out if you want to work with them to go through this if you really need that support. Thank you very much. You'll see me around again.